Ready for another deep dive. This time we're heading into the world of astrophysics and the search for, alien life. We're going to be talking about Avi Loeb.
Avi Loeb.
Yeah, so he's a pretty prominent astrophysicist and leading astrophysicist. Yeah, and he's been making a lot of noise recently with some of his ideas. One of the most interesting things is that he actually got $5 million in funding to launch a project called the Galileo Project to investigate UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Okay, so we're talking about
We're talking about aliens.
aliens. All right.
The possibility of alien visitors. So this is something that Loeb is kind of taking head on, this idea that we might not be alone, and he's approaching it very scientifically.
Right, and he's really trying to separate fact from fiction, which is, it's a very controversial topic, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that he says, which I think is really funny, is that, if we did ever encounter extraterrestrial visitors, like deporting them would be a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, how could you enforce...
Imagine like trying to enforce earthly borders on beings who've crossed interstellar distances, right?
Right.
And this kind of points to a larger point that he makes, which is that, the universe is so vast that the existence of other life forms, it's statistically likely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the universe is just massive.
Yeah, and that leads us to one of Loeb's most compelling arguments, which is this need for more openness in science to new ideas. And he's actually quite critical of what he calls scientific dogma. And he specifically points to theoretical physics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he says, for example, they've been really focused on things like string theory, which suggests that the universe is made up of, these tiny little vibrating strings and supersymmetry.
Okay.
But there's really been no experimental evidence.
Oh, wow.
For decades, they've been researching this. And he says it's almost like a religious belief at this point.
Interesting. It's interesting to draw the parallel between these scientific theories and religious beliefs because, it's faith, right? You're taking it on faith that this is the way that things are without having that empirical evidence.
Exactly. And instead, he's really pushing for us to get back to this data-driven inquiry, that science needs to be driven by evidence.
Absolutely. And it's about being willing to, challenge those long-held assumptions and not just taking things for granted because they've been around for a long time.
Yeah, like the story of Galileo, right?
Oh, yeah, Galileo.
Who was persecuted because of his observations.
Right.
That challenged the view of the universe at the time.
And right, challenging those norms, those established norms.
And Loeb sees himself as kind of in a similar position.
I see.
Like he's pushing against these established norms and saying, no, we need to look at the evidence and follow the evidence wherever it leads.
It's so important to question everything, really, and not just accept things because that's the way they've always been. And that's how science progresses right through that skepticism and through testing and retesting and refining.
And speaking of testing, that's another thing that he really highlights, which is this crucial difference between theoretical and experimental science.
Well, interesting.
He himself is a theoretical physicist, but he stresses that models and theories, you have to test them in the real world.
Right.
You can't just be, up in the clouds thinking about these things. You have to actually put them to the test. And he even says that being wrong is a really valuable part of the scientific process.
Absolutely. Mistakes are just opportunities to learn, right? And I think that that's something that a lot of people maybe don't realize about science is that it's iterative and it's about being willing to be proven wrong and to change your understanding based on the evidence.
Yeah, and that's really what's driving his Galileo project.
So tell me more about the Galileo Project.
Yeah, so he's taking this very systematic approach to investigating UAPs. And he's particularly interested in the possibility of actually finding artifacts.
Okay.
So like physical evidence that would prove that this extraterrestrial technology exists.
So not just, lights in the sky, but actual things we can touch and experiment on.
Exactly. And he's not shying away from the whole government secrecy thing either, with UAPs.
There's so much secrecy surrounding it.
Yeah, and he's like, we need to be transparent. We need to approach this scientifically, but we also need governments to be more open about what they know.
Right. It's about making all the information available so that we can have a clearer understanding of what we're dealing with.
Exactly. Now, one thing you might be wondering is how does all this connect to the broader scientific landscape?
Yeah, where does this fit in?
Right. And Loeb actually has some pretty strong opinions about the current state of research. And particularly, he's a little bit worried about the heavy emphasis on AI.
AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah. And of course, he acknowledges that AI has its benefits, but he's concerned that we're prioritizing it over fundamental science.
So we're focusing so much on the technology and the applications that we're forgetting to ask those really basic questions about, how the universe works.
Exactly. He says that, by focusing so narrowly on AI, we might miss out on some really groundbreaking discoveries in other fields.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Like, are we so focused on this one path of technological advancement that we're missing out on other possibilities, other avenues of exploration and discovery?
Right. And so I think, one of the big takeaways from Loeb's work is that it really invites us to think critically about the nature of scientific inquiry.
How we approach science.
Yeah, the importance of challenging assumptions and the potential for these revolutionary discoveries that could totally change our understanding of the universe.
Right, and our place in it. If we found definitive evidence of an advanced alien civilization, I mean, wow, that would really change everything.
Yeah, how would it change our perception of ourselves? How would it change our, maybe even our philosophical religious beliefs?
Like, where do we fit in if we're not alone? Are we special, or are we just one of many?
So many questions. If you're interested in exploring these ideas further, definitely check out the full interview with Avi Loeb in the show notes. It's a really fascinating conversation and definitely worth a deeper dive.